people at the beginning of every one of our Writers Week hours, and I am going to thank all of you. We could not do this for 30 years if we did not have a student body that is amazing and uses everything we see here to do some creative things. So give yourselves a big round of applause. So I am Mrs. Weidig, and our topic today is love. Love is amazing and terrifying and so confusing. And don't you just think it would be lovely if you had two best friends that you could bring all of your questions to, and they could talk it over with you and give you some solid advice. That is what this podcast is about. Don't break up. It is hosted by Sierra DeMulder and Sam Blackwell. They've been doing it for over 5 years, and they give incredible advice to all of your love questions. I want to point out that there's some merch right up here, so after this is over, come on up and get some merch. And I also want to let you know that this podcast, Just Break Out, is going to have a live recording here today in the Colsey Auditorium at 7 o'clock. So come on and see a podcast in action. Without further ado, please help me welcome Sierra and Sam.
Thank you. Welcome to Just Break Up, the podcast about love, heartbreak, and all the relationship advice you don't want to hear. My name is Sierra DeMulder.
And I'm Sam Blackwell, and that is actually the intro to our podcast. So if you tune into any episodes on Apple or Spotify, that's the first thing that you'll hear is Sierra and I coming on and introducing ourselves. We have been hosting Just Break Up for the last 5.5 years, and it's a weekly podcast, so we put out episodes every week, so it's been a lot of episodes.
Yeah, so, I think we're over 300.
Absolutely.
No, I don't know. Okay, so a little about our team. You can start, Sam.
Yeah, so my name is Sam Blackwell. So I am obviously a podcast host, but I also have other jobs that I work. So currently I do communications work for a climate justice organization in the state of Minnesota. And before that, I did work around racial and gender justice in organizations. And then before that, I worked in the homelessness space. So I worked with folks who are experiencing crisis and trying to help people enter a system that actually helped them rather than just made them do what they wanted them to do.
Yeah, and my name is Sierra DeMulder. As I said, I'm actually a longtime friend and Writers Week. I think I've performed here like 10 times because the other part of my career, in addition to being a podcast host, is I am a self-employed full-time writer. I published 5 books of poetry. I used to be a full-time touring spoken word poet, and if you want to see me do that side of my work, I'm going to be performing in 2 periods from now. But yeah, the podcast is a 3-person team. The lovely gentleman right here, his name is Spencer Worth Davis, aka Big Cats. He's a producer and DJ that's based out of Minneapolis. He's worked with some really major musicians like Lizzo and all of the Twin Cities hip-hop scene, and he makes music for like Johnson & Johnson ads and Nike, and he also produces and creates several other podcasts, or did, they since closed. But he's a big part of our team. We're definitely like split 3 ways in terms of the labor that is needed to produce a broadcast. So everything we talk about today here, he helps with. But in addition to being podcast hosts, or way before we were ever podcast hosts, Sam and I were best friends, and our best friends. And we've known each other for, I think we met when I was 21, and I'm 37 now. So, oh my God.
Wow.
I said that out loud for the first time in a long time. So we had to include like the friend montage of like all the different hair colors I've had since I've known Sam. And the time that we went and saw Santa together, when I officiated at their wedding, or no, not officiated, I didn't officiate. I just ran a poem, I was like, I ran it. Anyway, so we've known each other for a long time. You want to tell them how we met and like what brought us together as friends?
Yeah, so Sierra and I met each other because we started working at the same coffee shop together. I was working there in undergrad, and Sierra was too. And what happened was I went home for the summer break. I left the coffee shop job to go home for summer break, and when I came back to the coffee shop job, Sierra was working there, and I was like, who is this person?
He thought I was dumb and stupid.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he thought I was stupid and pretty.
Yeah, and you are pretty, but you're not stupid. And from there, our relationship kind of blossomed. The way that we realized we were kindred spirits was that I was reading a book called Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close at the coffee shop, and Sierra was like, oh my god, and then we held hands and cried with each other over the book.
The book was really sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we sort of bonded, just like talking about relationships. Obviously, we were young, and we were in really toxic and weird situationships, relationships with people.
Yeah.
And we found connection with each other, kind of talking about these things in a way that was about our own sense of self and what we should be doing.
Yeah.
And we kind of grew from there.
Yeah. So the podcast itself, I said that I was a poet for so many years. I was kind of getting burnt out on my poetry career. I had been like a full-time writer, hustling, self-employed for 10 years or so, and I realized that I needed to put my energy elsewhere. I needed to find some sort of like passion project to distract me, and I knew that one of my best friends, Spencer, was a producer, and he had the ability to make a podcast, and I also knew that my other best friend was smart and a good talker, I don't know. And then I got dumped by a loser who I should have never been with in the first place, and it made me really rethink like my priorities and where I was putting my love and things like that. So it started as a joke, like we were like at brunch, giving somebody relationship advice, and I was like, what if we had a podcast called Just Break Up, because we were basically being like, you should leave this person. And then it turned into a real thing when I realized we had the resources for it and that we wanted to do it. And we just sort of did it on a whim. I will say we had like, because of my poetry career, I had a certain amount of like online followers that were the foundational listeners of Just Break Up, so we weren't starting with 0 listeners. But I always like to say that like Sam's goal for the podcast was for us to have 100 listeners, all-time listeners. And I think I'll jump down to like the stats. We've been downloaded nearly 10 million times since our inception in 2018, and we have 150,000 monthly downloads or listens, and we're listened to in over 150 countries. So you meant countries, right? Oh, thanks. Thanks, I'll take that. Thank you. And so I love to look back on Sam's original goal. You want to tell them a little about what the podcast is about?
Yeah, so our podcast is about relationship advice. And you might think, oh, relationship advice, that's about like in partnership with people. It's about love. And it is. We answer a lot of questions from folks who are in romantic relationships with people. But we also answer a lot of questions about relationships between family members, or relationships between friends, or relationships between coworkers. So it isn't just about romantic stuff, but it's also just about like, how are we all connecting to each other? How are we being in relationship with each other?
And that is obviously connected to another one of our like big themes is we wrote mental health, but it's really like the relationship you have with yourself, and that sounds corny. But how we treat others or how we allow people to treat us it stems from how we treat ourselves or how we were taught to treat ourselves. So we really think that like your mental health, your wellness, how you are learning about yourself, learning to talk about yourself, learning where you come from, like your parents' relationships or your peers or whatever, and your patterns and habits, like that is a huge part of how you show up in partnership with other people. And that's a priority to us. We really value, that's another thing that was like bonding us as friends prior to being podcast hosts is like the courage to be vulnerable about like what's going on in our life. Not just like, oh, hey, how's work, but how's your relationship with your mother? What is it like? How does it make you feel when your partner treats you this way or whatever?
Sure. It's also about our lives. So Sierra and I obviously have been through a number of weird relationships in our lives. And so we talk about our own experiences with those relationships. We also talk about our own mental health journeys. So what have we been doing to help support ourselves, support our relationships. I'd like to think that as we're doing this podcast, we're also learning and growing with each other and with the listeners, because we don't have it figured out. We just have microphones and somebody who's willing to edit our episodes for us. That's the only differentiator.
We start our episode by saying like that we're not professionals, we're not trained in this, we're not mental health therapists, we're not relationship marriage counselors or anything. We're just speaking to you as friends across the brunch table or whatever about what's going on in your life.
For sure.
And that is another thing that our show really encapsulates or is important to us is queerness or the queer identity. Queerness is, or to be queer, it's the umbrella term that kind of like encapsulates all of the LGBTQ experience, and has been popularized in the last couple decades as sort of like a catch-all. So that's what I mean by saying that. Sam and I are both queer, and I put an asterisk here because like we didn't start the show to be like a queer advice podcast, and we don't answer solely queer questions or questions from people who are in same-sex relationships or whatnot. But it sort of like bled into that because obviously we both have those queer experiences in our own lives, and we started to hear from a lot of people that that was an important thing that was calling them in and keeping them at our show, is that we weren't just answering letters that were the typical heteronormative questions. We were looking at things from a queer lens, and that's not just like, oh, if you're a girl, you should go date a girl, right? That's thinking about things about like gender norms, like how it, you know, are you somebody who identifies as a man? How are you showing up to vulnerability and talking and treating your spouse in a culture that is traditionally been sort of subjecting to that or whatnot? You know, just sort of flipping the scripts around relationship advice so that it's not about your gender and more about how you're treating one another. Would you add to that?
For sure. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so then the stats, blah, 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 blah. I tried to, sorry, really quickly, I tried to include some pictures like from the last 5 years. That's like our original logo that we had for like 3 years. I made it on Canva in like 10 seconds and texted it to Sam and was like, do you like this? And they were like, yeah, sure. And then we just stuck with it, but then I kind of regret it.
Yeah.
We kind of regret the name, regret everything. So the process, you want to talk about the process?
Yeah, so we have a forum on our website where folks submit questions, and you know we have listeners in 100 and however many countries, and we get questions from a lot of different places. We have had over 6,500 letters to date in the course of our podcast, and some of them are as short as 1 sentence, and some of them are as long as 4 or 5 pages, single-spaced, which is a doozy to read, I'll tell you what. So I read them all first, and what I'm looking for in some of the letters is, you know, does this experience like relate to things outside of the letter writer's experience? So sometimes we get letters that are like just so full of details that it's hard to see like a bigger picture. But we're thinking about
can relate to,
yeah, that other people could relate to, right? But we're trying to think about our broader audience as well as the person who's writing the letter. I also look for like themes that happen in letters. So like we had a theme recently where like suddenly everyone in the world realized they were bisexual and were like freaking out about it. So they like wrote us 400 letters about it. So that was a theme that came up. We recently had a theme that was like everyone wants to get back with their ex even though it's a bad idea. So I'll kind of pull some of those letters as well. And then I also think about making sure that we have like new content as well. So if there's a letter we haven't or a question that we haven't read before, if somebody's asking something from like a very different experience, we'll also prioritize that as well. And then I send them off to Sierra, and Sierra picks 3 that we're going to answer, just based on what's resonating and some of the same criteria that I use.
Yeah, we just found that pairing system worked well for us in terms of the distribution of labor. We record 2 times at home. We used to record in our producer's studio when we lived in the same city prior to 2020. I moved in 2019 to be with my now wife, and when the pandemic hit, we got very quickly used to at-home recording virtually. We get on Zoom, we each have a home office with sound panels and a video and recording equipment, and so we record it at home. We do prep for these episodes, but it's primarily just like we both read the the letters independently. We talk about what we want to cover, and then we freestyle the whole episode. So it's like talk radio, conversational. And then the episodes get edited and uploaded to a hosting platform by our friend Spencer. He does a lot of like the polishing, taking out when we flub on the recording, because the episodes are freestyle, but they are edited. And then we write the episode titles and the copy. So like if you click on the Apple Podcast descriptions, like we have to decide what it says there. And honestly, that's really helpful for like feeding the Google search engine's results. Like if you want to search how to create boundaries in my relationship, hopefully you would be able to find one of our podcast episodes from that. So podcasts are free to make, but nope, said that wrong. Podcasts are free to listen to. How many people do you guys listen to podcasts? Okay, yeah, okay, probably like half of you. So you know that there are like 1 billion podcasts out there, and they're all free to just click. Some of them are behind paywalls, but the whole industry of podcasting is really interesting because it's based on this foundational idea that the actual core product is free. So how do you make a free product and then make money off of it? Well, a lot of people don't. We're in a very lucky small group of podcasters that have found some sort of authentic sustainability. Do you want to?
For sure. Yeah, so one of the ways that we make money is through advertisements. So there's 2 different types of advertisements that we use. So one is host-read, which means that brands like HelloFresh or Brooklyn and Sheets or something like that approaches us and says, we want to pay you to read an ad for us about your experience with our product. This is great because then we also get free product, which is really fun. So
love the HelloFresh.
Yeah, those Brooklyn and Sheets are really great. And then they offer us a script and we read through it, and that gets inserted into our episodes. And the other is through kind of the inserted ads in our podcast as well, but those are read by other people. So these are things like McDonald's or like a Ford car company or something. They have podcasts, or they have ads that they distribute across lots of different podcasts that are read by the same person. And we have spots in our episodes where they can insert those ads and then pay us for the listens that we get.
We also have a Patreon. Patreon is a platform. It's a subscription-based platform to support creators where they're fans of the creators or listeners of our podcast can subscribe for a small amount of money that gets monthly billed, like $5 a month, $10 a month, and then they get exclusive content from us for that support. So like I said, we record twice a week. Once a week we record all of the primary episodes that we release for free on those primary platforms, and then we record a Patreon episode that's behind a paywall. That's really great because we found that we have really great listener retention. So listeners tend to find us in crisis, like, oh no, I'm going through a breakup, or what am I doing, and then they stick around and they want to support us or tip us, and they can subscribe for us on Patreon. This is probably our most consistent form of income.
We also sell merchandise. There's some up here if you're interested after the show and coming up and taking a look. Merchandise can happen a bunch of different ways. For a while we were using a print-on-demand service, which is that when somebody orders a shirt on our website, the printer prints it and sends it to them. But they took a lot of money out of every sale.
Yeah, that sucked.
It was at one point we were like selling product for less than we were paying for it because it was so expensive.
We're not business people.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I was an English major, like I don't know anything about business. But now what we do is we print a bunch of stuff. We just like make a bunch of t-shirts and then we sell them as folks order them. So Sierra has a closet in her house that has all of our merch in it, and then she sends it out when people order it.
Yep. Which is on our website, which we also have to maintain along with like ad copy and whatnot.
For sure.
So we also do live shows. Podcasts, they'll say, oh, we're doing a live episode in this city. That's basically just like a live recording where your audience is in front of you. It's super fun because hosting a podcast is, although I'm talking to my best friend, it's also like speaking into the void. Like at any time, there are like 5,000 to 15,000 people listening to a Just Break Up episode, but we don't get to see them or talk to them or like feel their energy. So live shows are really great. There are also lots of upfront costs. Obviously, we both have other responsibilities like jobs and babies. so we can't always do live shows, but we do like them. And yeah.
And then there are investors. So there are people who want to take podcasts and invest in them. Some of those are podcast networks who like want to come in and buy your podcast from you, which we've been approached by, but we've never taken them up on it. And then for a while we were supported by Spotify. They paid us to be Spotify exclusive. So we were only on that platform. And then for a while we also had a silent investor who gave us money for things. It's really hard to tell you what they did, honestly. It was not a great relationship, but that's over. That's done now. We just broke up with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are photos from some of the live shows that we've done. So we thought we would share a couple ideas from our show that we like, or like that are reoccurring themes, because after 5 years, we sort of have like a foundational understanding or like an approach to relationships that we do. The first one that really changed me, like as I learned on the podcast, is a behavior can be both understandable and unacceptable. I feel like we really struggle with the nuance. We struggle with black and white thinking. So when we're in a relationship with someone we really love and they're treating us poorly, we're often going to like do a lot to understand why they're doing that, to empathize with them. Okay, well, their parent is sick, or they're feeling really stressed, or like they don't like being vulnerable, so they're lashing out at me, or whatever. We bend over backwards to justify people's behaviors, but it doesn't have to be black and white. It can be a yes and. It can be two true things at the same time. Like, I understand your behavior, I empathize with what you're going through, and also, at the same time, your behavior is unacceptable, and I'm going to step away from that.
Yeah, one of the other things that we talk a lot about too is this idea of somebody is giving you their 100%, even if it feels like 30% or 40% or 50% to you. We get lots of letters from people who are like, oh, I love my partner, I just wish that they could give me more, I wish that they would show up for me in this way.
It would be such a great partner if they did that.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like I'm just waiting for them to be able to give me more of what I need. And what we tell people is like, that's their 100%. They're giving you everything that they can, right? Like in your head, maybe they could give you more, but they're proving that they can't. So,
can't date potential.
Yes, you can't date potential, right? You can only date actual human beings and what they're actually doing in relationship with you. So we always try and remind people to say like, is 50% enough, right? And maybe it is, and maybe they can move forward with that, but often people kind of realize like, oh, there's nothing coming down the pike that's where I'm suddenly going to get 100%, or they're going to suddenly start supporting me in the way that they need them to.
Yeah. I wanted to just say, too, that, like, we joked earlier that we sort of regret our name. We don't. We like it, but we know that it can, like, turn people off or lead people astray, because we don't just tell people to break up unless we really think they should. And we are also very pro-relationships working. We're pro putting in the work that human connection requires of us, because it's not all easy, it's not all intuitive, and none of us really know what we're doing, and we learn as we go. So we also get like a lot of episodes about conflict, but we mostly want people to be able to live authentically as themselves and feel free to be in relationship with people that make them feel safe and happy and whatnot.
Sure.
So we can tell you like some of our favorite, or like normal letters are like, somebody will be like, I have a crush on my coworker, but I think dating a coworker might be problematic. What should I do? Or
my ex is moving back to my city. Should I reach out to them? Should I talk to them? What do I do if I run into them when I see them on the street?
We also get a lot of questions like, I feel inherently undateable, like I am always situationships, I never like get into the DTR part of things, and yeah, what's another example?
Yeah, a lot of questions about like, I am in a relationship with somebody, and I recently sort of have come to terms with the fact that I am bisexual. What do I do now? Because I want to stay with this person, but I also want to explore some of the new sides of me. I want to see what's out there.
Yeah.
What can I do about that?
Yeah. So that's like, I I mean, honestly, 6,000 plus letters. That's like a very brief summary of it, but we wanted to tell you one of our most memorable, aka chaotic letters, because also people write us in crisis, so we're all messy. Number one, we're all messy, but the most chaotic letter we ever got was from a 65-year-old woman who was married to her high school sweetheart. Her high school sweetheart had routinely cheated on her their entire like 50-year relationship, and he would always get caught. She would always be like, "I'm gonna leave you," and he would beg her to stay and promise change behavior and stuff like that. And finally, the catalyst for her writing to us is that she found him cheating on her again, basically. And in the letter, it was like an aside in the letter. She was like, "And by the way, I created a profile on this dating app, and I'm now catfishing my own husband." A 65-year-old woman. I mean, that's like awesome. I mean, it's not awesome. It's incredibly inappropriate, and like she needs to break up with that person. But we thought that was funny. Okay, so we just wanted to end before we move into like questions and stuff with what like our purpose is, what our values are, what has kept us making this show happen for the last 5 years, because it is a lot of work. The first thing is something that we fundamentally believe, all of us in this room, all of your teachers, all of your parents, all of your elders, all of your community members, none of us are born with like a manual on how to be in relationship with one another. We're not born with a manual on like how to be a human. And guess what? Being a human is, if you haven't figured it out yet, very complicated and very confusing, and we are guaranteed suffering, and we're guaranteed joy, and like what do we do with all these experiences and emotions, especially when we inherit a lot of patterns and behaviors from our family or from rom-coms that have really questionable ethics in them and stuff like that. So Sam and I, our foundational value is that we're all messy and we're all here to learn. We're all doing the best that we can with the knowledge and experience that we have in this moment, but guess what? We get to try again. We get to do better. We get to show up to this wild human experience. So, yeah.
Sure. Also, it's important for us to represent queer people in the landscape of relationships. I think that there's a lot of different places where folks are getting relationship advice that are really focused on like prescribed gender norms, really focused on the assumption that people are gonna be in relationship in one particular way. And it's important for us to, build community with other queer people and with straight people or cis people who like want to be part of that community, and really try and challenge some of the assumptions that we have about relationships, what they should look like, how they should be, and it's really important for us to keep doing that work in this space.
And finally, we really just believe that we change the world on like a micro level. We change the world by changing the way we treat ourselves and other people. And like relationships are hard, they're weird, and they're evoking. And we like that we're like a little bit less alone on that human experience with our community. So this is a cute picture of Sam and I on the cover of a magazine that's based out of Minneapolis. You can, if you want to listen to our show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify. We also have like YouTube videos out. You can follow us on Just Break Up Pod. All of our episodes are free to listen to, except for the exclusive content behind the paywall. Or you can come to our live show tonight, happening here in this auditorium at 7 p.m. We are going to be answering questions from the FREMD community. We have a FREMD-specific submission form, so if you want to submit a question about all matters of the heart, you can check out that code and come hang out with us at 7 p.m. tonight. We've gotten a lot of questions already, a lot of questions about if I should stay together with somebody when I go to college, things like that. It will be a good time. And we also have merchandise. We're going to take questions for a little bit first, but I just wanted to say we've got Just Break Up crop tops, t-shirts, we have notebooks that say let go of what doesn't want to be held. We have pins and stickers, and we have one of my favorite pieces of merchandise, which is a red flag. So, y'all, do you have any questions about creating a podcast, being a podcast host, or relationships? That's a great question. We've been approached by
At least two.
two different networks that offered to pay us a significant amount of money, but they would have forever rights for our show moving forward. And we asked them about their values as a network, what the transfer of power would look like, or like what the ownership rights would look like, obviously financial logistics, and then independently we sort of did the math, really. Like, it's a lot of work to run the show ourselves, but we've also got it to be like a well-oiled machine at this point, and we're taking in 100% of the profits minus our costs. So we just realized that, like, even though they were offering us a really pretty large chunk of money, in the future we're self-sufficient right now. So we just said we didn't want to give up that ownership, basically, at the end of the day. And we also thought that they weren't really offering us a lot that we didn't already feel very confident in executing ourselves.
And it's important for us to have control over the content that we put out too. And you know, when you sign over 100%, 75%, 50% of your podcast, then suddenly someone else has like a 50%, 75% say in what the content might look like or be like. And of course they all were like, we're not going to touch the content. And also we know that that might not actually be true. So it was important for us to make sure that we were kind of the owners of the stuff that we were putting out into the world.
Yeah, that's a great question. Any other questions? Yeah. That's a great question. The question is, how long does it take to record it? Our episodes, we used to do answer 3 letters in one episode and answer them once a week. Now we do, to make more ad revenue, to make it more profitable, we divided it into 3 smaller episodes, which are roughly half an hour each. I think sitting down to sitting back up, maybe 2.5 hours total, because we check in first, we do the work, and then we record. We may have to like figure out what we want to say. But yeah, 2.5 hours. Yeah. Especially because we've been doing it for so long at this point, it is totally freestyled, and so if it's a half an hour episode, it probably took us 40 minutes to record, maybe.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Cool, dudes. Any questions about relationship advice? Yeah. Yeah. The question is like, if we disagree on the advice we're going to give, how do we assess how we're going to handle that, and how much of that do we let on air?
So we kind of talk about our points of view on it, and sometimes it'll be like, oh, whoops, like an absolutely different thought than you're having here. And we just kind of talk it through with each other. And we also, I think, try and do some of that actually on the podcast, because I think it's important for us to not pretend like Sierra and I know everything and are in agreement about everything, and because like the situations that people write into us about are really complicated. So it's not always clear that there's like a one right or best way to do it. So depends on the situation, but most often we'll be like, okay, well, let's like agree to disagree and offer both of our takes on this thing.
Very great. Any other questions? Yeah. I wish I could tell you there was a follow-up, but there wasn't. We get follow-ups sometimes in our DMs or like in our submission box, but we don't even know if people listen to the episodes that they submitted because there's not a tracking system. So unfortunately, I did not hear what happened to the catfishing. Just break up. No, we talked for like 30 minutes affirming the fact that like this person has repeatedly hurt you and you're accepting crumbs. Like you're accepting crumbs of a relationship when you really deserve the whole meal. You deserve somebody to be with you in a whole way. And another thing I learned on the show is like our show really idolizes long-lasting relationships. Like my grandparents were together like 55 years before my grandfather passed. And that's beautiful because they had a lovely relationship. But culturally, we really seem to prioritize the length of a relationship, you know, over the actual quality of it. And in that instance, she was repeatedly cheated on repeatedly made me feel less than. And in that case, like, my priority isn't preserving a long-lasting relationship that isn't inherently working. My priority is that this woman deserves to feel good about herself and desired and respected in her partnership. So we ultimately said, like, you deserve to go find somebody else who doesn't make you work this hard. Any other questions? Yeah. Have you agreed upon it with all consenting partners? That's either called an open relationship or polyamorous. Polyamorous means that you can have emotional feelings. Oh my God, 2 people at once, guys. It means that you can have emotional feelings for, romantic feelings for more than one person at the same time. Or if you have an open relationship, it means that maybe you and your partner or partners have decided that you can consensually step outside of the bounds of what is a monogamous relationship. I did see you guys giggling about the question before, so I'm not really sure if this is a serious question, but I actually think it's a great question because relationships look different, right? They look different from what we see on TV. Sam's relationship looks different than mine. My relationship looks different than your teacher's, and the rules within each relationship can be unique to that relationship as long as you're presenting that relationship with respect, honesty, clarity, and authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we say when we say like our podcast is queer coded. Is that like we're not saying that we're not only answering people's letters who are queer or not answering letters of advice like go date somebody who is queer. We're saying like we're here to disrupt the script of traditional relationship advice that is really questionable sometimes. So like if you're dating 2 people, I love that the person who asked the question isn't actually listening and is talking to their friend. I love that high schoolers are like, oh my God, they can't see me. Okay, so anyway, I don't even remember what I was saying, but like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the important thing is the consent aspect of this, right? The important thing is like, are you telling each other and talking to each other and agreeing to the parameters of your relationship? And if everyone's doing that and everyone's on board, then great, your relationship can look however it needs to look. So if you're dating multiple people, I think that that's fine as long as everyone in the situation is consenting to you dating other people.
Any other questions? Yeah. We met at a coffee shop when we were 20 and 21, 2019. And we, 10 plus years later, we thought it was going to be fun. It was just going to be, it was a passion project. We had no idea that it would ever turn into anything substantial. Yeah. Yes, other question. I can't see. Who's, yes. That's a great question. And honestly, I think that wears on Sam and I more than our listeners. Like,
yeah.
We see the repetition more than they do, I think.
And because, like, you know, people will come in at different times in their lives, right? So, you know, it's not like everyone has listened to every episode from episode 1 to episode 300, right? They come in because they're in a crisis or they're having an issue with their relationship. And so when we answer their letter, it might be the first time that they've heard this advice, even though it feels to us like we've given it a bunch of times. And I think actually what people like about our podcast is that some of the things that we say consistently are things they need to hear multiple times in order to internalize them, right? Folks don't learn something because they hear it once. They learn it because they've heard it over and over. And lots of us are in relationship patterns that we've learned from like childhood, right? We've learned for a long time. So our disruption of those patterns, it means that we need to do things consistently differently, right? We need to be talking about things consistently differently. And that is, I think, what keeps us sane. When we're like, again with the back with the ex, you really want to get back with the ex again? What are you doing?
I think it's almost comforting that there's a lot of repeated themes, you know, because then I'm like, oh, I'm not the messed up one. Like, we're all dealing with the same things. But there is also enough like human diversity that the questions do vary.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, a couple more questions. One more question. Anybody? Or else we can check out
Over here.
What's the most toxic relationship
Oh my god.
Ooh.
I don't know.
Each other's,
Yeah.
maybe?
I don't know. To be honest, at this point, we used to be able to like remember, we've read so many letters. There's people out there being like, I downloaded Tinder because I was bored, even though I've been dating you for 7 years or whatever. People gaslighting people, whatever. I mean, we've read it all. I'm sorry I don't have a specific answer. Honestly, we tried to brainstorm like other funny ones along with the 65-year-old Cat Fisher, but we couldn't remember. Yeah, they're all free to listen to. Yes, repeat letter writers. Yep, follow-ups for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, they're called our patrons on Patreon. Just kidding. It's me, really. Cool. Any other last questions? Or else we could just do some merch time. So, y'all, again, I hope to see you tonight at 7 p.m. Or Sam and I have the next period free, so if you don't get a chance to talk to us, we will be around or in the Scott Melody room. I'm also doing a poetry set in 6 hours. So if you want to come see me read my work. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You guys pins and red flags and notebooks and t-shirts if you're interested, or just come say hi.
Silent. No, Spotify's gone. Amanda will never know.